And now for a history-making moment here at the event, I would like to introduce our very first keynote speaker, Mr. Douglas B. Silver. I have known Doug for many, many years. Too many to count, actually, and many of you here certainly know him or of him. Doug has experienced a wide-ranging career in the mining industry, from prospecting geologist to portfolio manager. He has served in various roles throughout the industry. In his spare time, Douglas is a well-known mineral economist, keynote speaker, and author. He has testified 3 times to the U.S. Congress on mining-related issues. Doug's strong interest in education and women's issues has kept him busy serving on advisory boards for the University of Arizona and Colorado School of Mines. Doug also founded the Denver Gold Group and was inducted into the U.S. National Mining Hall of Fame and Museum in September 2018. Doug, the stage is yours.
Bonjour, mes amis. Although I'm an American, I love Canada. I've been coming up here for 40 years. And today what I'm going to do is talk to you about how important Canada is to the global mining industry. Now, if you've heard my speeches before, it's fact-driven, a lot of data. I would encourage you not to take notes. You can get a copy of the speech from the organizers or pin me down and give me your card. Be happy to share it because, as I said, it is very data-rich. So, every good speech you have to have caveats. I'm looking only at public mineral companies throughout the world. My data shut-off was the end of December because it takes a long time to synthesize data. The data is being presented in U.S. dollars, unless otherwise specified, and this is simply because gold is in U.S. dollars, and you'll see why. Many companies have multiple listings on different stock exchanges in different countries. So what I did is, whatever country their headquarters is located in, their senior-most stock exchange is how I listed them. And then finally, I'm not giving you a talk about where to invest or who to invest. When I talk about gold resources, I'm gluing together measured, indicated, and inferred resources, because what I'm really looking at is global endowment, and I don't really care about what the regulators want. So first of all, why Canada? Well, Canada's located in the Northern Hemisphere. 67% of the Earth's lands are in the Northern Hemisphere, 73% of our countries, and 87% of our population. So whether you're a prospector or an investor, you kind of want to be where the land is, and that plays actually a very large role in this. Canada is among one of the top 10 democracies in the world. Norway, by the way, still gets number 1. And it has a vast diversity in mineral endowment. You can look at the porphyry copper deposits on the west coast. You look at VMS deposits, diamond deposits, orogenic gold. There's so many different deposit types that are very prevalent in Canada. Canada ranks as one of the top 20 countries in resources for 37 out of the 83 minerals and metals that are tracked by the USGS. And it has a strong natural resource culture. And it goes beyond mining. It's forestry, agriculture, making poutine. It's got a lot of different areas. Finally, being next door to the United States is not a bad thing to do. And more than 50% of the U.S. imports for 16 commodities are coming from Canada. This really puts Canada in the catbird seat for selling their products. So what I did is I had the help from the Northern Miner, and we looked at all of the projects that are in Canada. And there's over 3,700 projects. And as you can see in this graph, most of them are in Quebec, our host province today. This makes a lot of sense. I have in my prior life in private equity, my firm invested more than $1 billion in Quebec. It's a wonderful place to invest. You have a regulatory system that makes sense. You have IQ in the case and all the large government groups that are very helpful and very encouraging for mining. Ontario and British Columbia are in second and third place, and then you can see it slowly goes down to all the other provinces. And this is just a graphical presentation of these projects. Now, if you're an investor, this is what you have to pick through. And there's a lot of projects here. So then what I did is I looked at each company and tried to figure out what their principal commodity focus was. And as you can see, more than 50% of them are focused on gold. And this pretty much holds globally as well. Next is copper and then silver for Canadian projects. But there's a whole lot of other commodities as well. And I think this is very important because if you're a country that only has a couple commodities, you're really limiting your investor pool. But when you have so many different commodities that are found and mined here, it should draw a much larger investment pool. So I know you all like gold. I did a study in 2021, and I wanted to roll out some interesting statistics. I was able to compile over 1,400 gold deposits in the world, of which about 330 of them are in Canada for almost 600 million ounces of gold. And if you look at Canadian companies, because the Canadian companies are very, very global. If you look at the Canadian companies globally, they own 840, just about 840 gold deposits for close to 2 billion ounces. This is 2 billion ounces out of a total of 4 billion, so roughly half. But I know most investors, particularly gold investors, are only interested in the big ones. So I took a subset of this database and looked at gold deposits that were over 1 million ounces contained. And there were 625, of which 126 were in Canada, for a total of 500 million ounces. And if you look at these other statistics here, you can see that globally, again, Canadians control over 350 1 million plus ounce gold deposits for about 1.7 billion ounces of gold. Phenomenal amount. And if you're a gold investor, you don't have to go very far to find one of these to invest in. The Fraser Institute, which I'm sure many of you are aware, it does an attractiveness index. And Canada provinces hold 5 of the top 16 rankings in their most recent attractiveness survey. And if anybody here is from Newfoundland, it's number 21. Just thought you'd like to know that. Expenditures. Later today, I believe, Richard Shoddy is going to be giving a speech about exploration spending. His numbers are much, much larger than mine. But even my numbers show more money is spent in Canada on exploration than any other country in the world. And, you know, that's probably why they have 3,700 projects. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And, of course, why? Part of it is because of flow-through financing. It's such a unique investment tool, and why other countries don't adopt it is beyond me. I know in the U.S. we've tried several times to get it, and it hasn't worked. But in Canada, it's a very powerful investment tool, particularly for early-stage companies. So then I took a look at the Canadian companies globally. And again, this information was provided by the Northern Mining Intelligence Group. They're wonderful people. They gave me a lot of data. There's over 6,000 projects in 97 countries. And most of the projects are in North America. North America being defined as Canada, U.S., and Mexico. Latin America is in very distant second place. But as I'll show you before, Latin America is one of the hottest places to invest globally. So again, if you have a particular country you're interested in, you can probably find a Canadian company that's operating there. And because Canadian companies come from a democratic system, things like corruption and all of that is minimal or non-existent, hopefully non-existent. So I went through this list of over 6,000 deposits, and I thought, well, what's the project status? And again, over half of them are prospecting. That could be prospecting, or it could be prospecting where they had a discovery hole. But prospecting, by my definition, means there's no resources. Over half the companies are prospecting, early stage stuff. Why is this important? Because when Canada goes overseas, they take Canadian standards like 43-101 and transparency practices and anti-corruption practices with them. And a lot of these other countries don't have any standards. Sure as hell don't have them at our level. So the Canadians are providing a service to the global mining industry by taking those practices with them. And in addition, I mean, maybe you're an investor who invests in producing mines, but you know what, folks? If you don't have somebody prospecting and discovering new ones, over time you're going to run out of candidates. So the prospecting part is very important. If we look at the other half, you notice that there's a lot of delineation. This means they have something in the way of a resource. Maybe it's only inferred, but they got a resource. and they're trying to drill out more ounces. And then the rest of that pie diagram are various stages of engineering and metallurgical studies and all of that. But again, the full gambit of everything you want to do in the mining industry is right here. Capital spending. Look at Cana. The Canadian companies outshine all the other countries around the world. And this is from E&MJ. If you don't get it, you should. It's free. Every year they do a big project survey, and they provided me with historical data as well. Wonderful, wonderful study. But you can see how Canada is pumping more money into capital spending along with exploration, along with this, that, and the other thing. They're everywhere, and they're really the leaders. So, in 2018, because I don't have a life, I went through 257 stock exchanges. And yes, folks, there's actually more than that, but I don't speak Russian and a few of those other languages. But I went through them looking for public mining companies and mineral companies because I was curious about what the distribution was. We know, because we go to Canada and we work in Canada, that they have a lot of companies. But what about the rest of the world? Like, does India have a lot of mining companies that I don't know about because I don't invest in Indian stocks? And the answer is that 80% of the mining companies' market capitalization is coming from these 5 countries. Now, let's take a little harder look at this. Canada has the TSX, TSXV, and the NEX. All 3 of those are owned by the TMX group. And as you know, it's really a graduation platform where you start at the low end and then you move your way up to the TSX. Australia, on the other hand, only has 1 stock exchange. The United Kingdom has 3, and the United States has at least 7. And if anybody can explain to me how OTC stocks work, I would love to know it. When I'm going through here and there's a market cap of an OTC mining company that's $1,500, you just got to wonder what's going on. And then I threw in Johannesburg because, you know, South Africa is one of the greatest countries in the world when it comes to geology. Going forward, I'm going to just refer to the countries rather than necessarily each of the stock exchanges. So when we look at the distribution of companies, there's about 2,400 public mineral companies in the world, of which almost 60% of them are Canadian, and for a total market cap of about $358 billion. And you can see that Australia is in distant second place, and then the rest of them are almost rounding errors when it comes to the number of companies. And if we take this a step further, I've highlighted in yellow here the Canadian stock exchanges and how they rank by the number of companies. And 3 out of the top 5 exchanges are Canadian. If we take the same data and sort it by market cap, what we see is New York has the highest market cap. Well, that's because the New York Stock Exchange caters to the very large producers. So there's not very many companies, but they're worth a heck of a lot. Toronto Stock Exchange is in second place, and you can see the position of the other ones. So 53% of the market cap of mining companies is actually between the TSX and the New York Stock Exchange. And again, at the bottom, I've listed the totals on these numbers for you. So then what I thought is, okay, well, let's go through each of these companies by country and look at the distribution of their most advanced project by commodity. And what you can see is that gold, copper, and silver are the big 3. And you know, silver's kind of the poor cousin of gold, so it makes sense there's a lot of silver companies tagging on behind the gold companies. In addition, you'll notice there's a bunch of companies here in green. These are the green economy metals, as been defined by the media. That's a talk unto itself. But for purposes here, if you're interested in investing in green metals, look at how many opportunities you have in Canada versus the other countries. And I mean, South Africa doesn't even have a top 10 commodities. They've only got a top 6 commodities. And the other countries, United Kingdom and the US, have very little representation. If we take the same chart and sort it by market cap for these top 10 commodities, again, gold leads the way. And I always kind of knew there were a lot of gold companies, but I didn't realize how overwhelming they were in terms of the number of gold companies. And now you start seeing the iron companies, which, as you know, they all have mine lives of 500 years, and they've got big market caps. They start showing up when you look at market cap, but copper's still in the mix. Yep. And then you can look down at the rest of them. Finally, I went back and I looked at the distribution of the highest project in a company. So say you took Newmont. I mean, obviously their highest project is a producer. I reclassified every company by its highest level of development. And you can notice that Canada beats in every category except for two. And we got to give a shout out to the Aussies on feasibility and development, where they outnumber the Canadians. But the other countries are basically irrelevant. Canada has an overwhelming representation in anything you're looking at. So then I wanted to take a look at the market cap. And since the TSX and the TSXV are part of the TMX group, and that's where most of the Canadian companies are listed, I looked at the market cap over the last 10 years. And they've had a 160% increase in market cap. And this is despite pandemics, Ukrainian wars, bad weather, the Nordiques, I mean the Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup. Canada's done great. It's truly a leader on market cap on companies. And in fundraising, there's more than 1,300 financings done every year on these two exchanges, and it represents billions of dollars. So you have a highly liquid market, you have a lot of opportunity, and you have a lot of variety. So then, okay, you got your listing, you got your project, now you got to raise money. So let's look at the Canadian investment banks. And there was a study done of 650 mining banks globally. Who would have thought? I thought it was just the big seven in Canada. And you can see that the big Canadian mining banks rank in the top 20 on a number of categories. Speaking of financing, let's talk about my favorite subject, royalties. You know, the royalty industry has changed a great deal in the last 35 years, and it has now become a very large source of financing for companies. And it's companies of all different levels. You know, you always hear, oh, they're trying to buy production. Yeah, they focus on that, but they buy prospecting, they buy things in delineation, all the different categories. But right now, there's 36 public royalty companies, of which 26 are Canadian. They represent 84% of the total industry's market cap. And if you take Franco and Wheaton, those two companies represent 70% of the industry's market cap. I always knew they were big, but I didn't realize how overwhelmingly big they are. And like I said, the royalty companies have become a major source of financing. And again, having them Canadian means that you have rapid access to them. Well, you can't raise money without lawyers, right? We all know that. So there was a study done where they tallied over 500 mining lawyers globally. And again, Canada outshines everybody. There's more Canadian lawyers than anywhere else. Australia, again, is in second place. I was surprised the U.S. Was in third place, because I thought that's all we had in the U.S. were lawyers suing everybody. And I'm sure you know a few of these firms. So now you're going to go on the road because you want to go visit some of these companies. So because I had the data anyway, I plotted up where their headquarters were located. And as you can see, Vancouver, Perth, and Toronto represent almost 70% of the locations for mineral company headquarters. So you really don't have to go to very many places to cover most of the industry. And then you see London and Sydney follow up. And I do have to do a little caveat here. Normally, when you do these types of graphs, you have the top 10. You know, everybody does that. I have the top 11 because Denver actually ranked, and I wanted to get a little home turf advertising in here. So, concluding remarks. Canada has a strong natural resource culture and thousands of projects and companies. Vast mineral endowment and many, many different types of geology, wonderful geology. TSX and the TSXV are two of the world's leading mining stock exchanges, and equally important is that you have a very rational regulatory system here. I was involved in the development of SimVal. I was involved in the development of 43101. I have worked directly with the OSC. These people genuinely want to do the right thing, and from my experience, they're looking for solutions, not ways of prohibiting you. I can't say that about some other countries south of Canada. There's a disproportionate number of exploration companies, but these are serving as a catalyst for mining's global future, so you really should have some of them in your portfolio. And because of all of this, the Canadian industry is supported by many of the world's top legal, accounting, engineering, metallurgical, drilling firms. And basically, if you want international expertise in any subject related to mining, you can easily find it in Canada. So, one-stop shopping, why aren't you investing here? Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. That was certainly enlightening and certainly timely. Let me just get my speech back here. Do we have any questions from the audience that Doug can answer?
Yo.
Yes.
Yeah. That was 2 questions? Yeah, with like 6 subparts. Okay. First thing, I was really surprised at the predominance of gold companies. I mean, I always know there's a lot of gold companies, but I'm sorry, folks, if you don't have jewelry or dental work, why do we need so much gold? And it's not that I'm against gold. Hell, my last name's Silver. Last thing I'm going to do is fight precious metals, right? But I was really surprised how many gold companies there were. And the only conclusion in my head I can come up to is that when you build a gold mine, it's hundreds of millions of dollars of capital which can be raised. Where if it's a copper mine, it's billions of dollars, which is much harder in today's market to raise. I think that's one of them. The other thing is, it was probably around 2010 or so when the Canadian companies got away from being gold only. And all of a sudden, things like nickel and VMS deposits and non-precious metal projects started to take root. And so it wasn't always gold talks, gold talks, gold talks. And I like that. I like the variety. I mean, I think VMSs are the ultimate investor deposit type because you have 4 or 5 metals you can recover. It's portfolio diversification with one drill hole sort of thing. I think those are the 2 main things that I noticed differently.
And then the second question was where we are now in terms of distribution of activity versus where you think we need to be in 5 to 10 years.
Well, where I think we need to be and where we're going are unrelated. Right now, green metals are hot, so there's an awful lot of green metal companies. You know, the guys in Canada who are doing cannabis realize it's heavily regulated, so they're all switching back to mining, and they're all grabbing lithium and nickel, and you know, they're grabbing these really large tonnage, low-grade things that they think they can make $1 on. That was for his. But I think what you're going to see is a continued diversification of commodities, because I don't have it in this presentation, but the United States government does a study about every 50 years on critical elements and metals and stuff. And back in 1932, when they did the first one, there was like 20, and now there's like 80. As we advance society, particularly electronically, we have a greater and greater need for commodities that we didn't traditionally chase. And so you're going to see people chasing things like rhenium and rhenium and other commodities that weren't traditionally followed. I mean, I know I've seen a number of these porphyry copper deposits where they're now reporting their copper grades, their moly grades, their gold grades, their silver grades, and their rhenium grades. It's like, really? So the move towards the rarer metals seems to be growing because we actually need those for our electronics. So I see that as the gap that we need to fill. Is that all right? Other questions? Good. Yes. Right. Yes, sir. I think globally there's a big gap. So it's not, I'm not going to isolate Canada. We see this with exploration, where the big companies decided that exploration was a necessary evil as opposed to an integral part of their business, so they cut the budgets back. R&D has suffered in the mining companies for almost as long as I've been in it. And then last week, Vale came out and said they're putting $100 million into technology. And Newmont and Caterpillar have this $100 million alliance where they're trying to make their trucks more green. The mining industry in general has two major flaws. One is they're not putting enough money into the schools to get replacement workers. And meanwhile, as you've all seen, the reason we have such a shortage of labor right now is not because the 20-year-olds are lazy. It's because the baby boomers are retiring and such a large group of people that it's creating this thing. I think the mining companies need to put a lot more money into education and into R&D. But it's sort of coming in bits and pieces as opposed to one country's better than another. That's a big question, by the way. Good question.
Do you think that the roadblock is the adoption of technologies rather than the investment and creation of technology?
No, I think the problem is that all the companies are trying to post the best profits they can, and spending money on stuff like research and development or exploration is a high-risk proposition. So they don't allocate very much money towards it. And what they're going to learn is that without that, we're not going to keep up with society's demands. But having said that, and Mark, you'll back me on this, this idea of taking your nickel tailings and using aerosols rather than slurry lines and tailings to take carbon dioxide out, there's good stuff going on there. There's a lot of groups that are doing small stuff, but there's no sort of, as far as I can tell, some centralized group that's directing all this research. So it's going to be a huge problem, and hopefully one of these days the CEOs will wake up and start putting some money into R&D, particularly for their own operations. Anybody else?
Could you comment on the global distribution of capital outside of Canada into Canada, and specifically investment? Where's most of the money coming from, and then what could the industry do to attract more outside capital, specifically U.S. capital?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that data, but I do know that when Canada dropped the requirement that you couldn't have more than 10% in foreign stocks, that altered the playbook a bit. That was probably 20 years ago they did that, but sorry, I can only collect so much data. Sorry, I don't have an answer for that. Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Greatly appreciated.